With everything going on in the world, people need to be uplifted. They need something that promotes character, creativity, confidence, and joy. The GRN show is not just an average talk show. The topics are powerful and will make you think. Join me on this journey to be informed, to relate, to connect, and to evolve.
Good evening and welcome to the GRN show. My name is Gatel Ruiz-Nicolas and I will be your host. According to Maya Angelou, she noted that if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you are going. And it makes sense. It makes sense. I think of myself in a foreign country. I don't know where I am, even if I want to go to the hotel. So basically, that is the same concept I feel with the saying I've mentioned, as well as, with our history. So currently, there are efforts in many states, 36 states, to really dictate what teachers can teach our children as it pertains to Black American history or African American history. Just think of it this way. Teachers cannot teach about racism. Teachers cannot discuss sexism. A number of those divisive topics almost become illegal, or it's not a proper regulation, as they would say it, because that is the kind of law that our legislators are trying to really pass. As I mentioned, 36 states. So when you think about our children not being able to really hear about their ancestors, their trials, their tribulation, and their triumphs, how they've overcome the many obstacles that they face, I think it is a detriment, simply because these type of individuals or characters in our history, not only do they build character, but they also help our students really identify who they are as they develop their identity. So we have with us Rudy Jean Bard. He is an associate dean for Broward College, but he is also a historian, an entrepreneur, as well as a motivational speaker. So, Rudy, good evening and welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
This is a topic that is really picking up some steam because, obviously our children's education is at risk with the different bills I've mentioned. Florida, for example, they're looking at House Bill 7. Can you please just give us a brief synopsis? What does House Bill 7 mean? What does it entail?
Sure. So House Bill 7 is entitled the Individual Freedom Bill, if you will. And a lot of it is really geared towards suggesting that school children, as an example, should not have to be subject to matters that they might find offensive. Really, the purpose of this bill, and like you said earlier, right, this is not just Florida. We see this in over 30 other states as well, is really to say, in particular for white children, that they should not be exposed to historical matters that they might feel offended by, as well as may suggest that there is issue with their race, right? What is perplexing about it all is that at what costs are these bills being created? And so if the thought is we must be able to not have white children be offended, for them to be able to be proud of their whiteness, well, then what are we saying also to Black children, to Indigenous children, to in children of Latin origin, right? This idea, if you will, that certain historical truths should not be shared. And that becomes really, really complicated. I know for me, in my history of teaching African American history, as well as American history, there were a lot of things that I was able to share that are historical truths, not opinion, that for a lot of my college students, they were never made aware of, right? And so I think a lot of that is going to continue, and even more so, you're going to have more teachers who are going to be very, very hesitant to teach certain historical truths because of the fact that there might be some legal consequences for doing just that.
Wow. So does that mean a lot of the new books, perhaps, where there is more African American history, will those books be banned, or will the curriculum change? I don't know how that works.
Yes, we already see in various states where books are being removed from school libraries already, not just matters or books that really touch upon race, but also books that touch upon sexual orientation. And so you're having this really interesting dynamic happening in America that really is akin, if you will, to the Cold War era, right? Where there was this massive fear of communistic invasion. And so what you have is just continual and perpetual banning of books being discussed. But again, it becomes a question of at what cost. People should be alarmed and people should be aware that we are entering into a space that seems very anti-democratic. And the fact that this anti-democratic stance is really being promoted in places of legislature is of the utmost concern.
It's really sad that our children's education is really impacted by politics. And I think it's more or less the parents. It may not necessarily be the children because children adapt. So I'm really concerned, and it will be quite interesting to see where the chips fall after the legislative session. So Rudy, there is this project that I've kind of been following a little bit, very, very interesting. And sometimes I look at the comments that people make, and you have you have a group of people who feel it was one of the best books written, and you have others who say, "Oh no, you're lying about our history." Tell us a little bit about the 1619 project.
So I think even before that, right, I think it's important to get a sense of who the author of the 1619 project, or really the editor of the 16 project, who that is, right? And that's Nicole Hannah Jones, who still works for the New York Times, but definitely was, even before the release of the 1619 project, was somebody who had written extensively for the New York Times, particularly on matters of education, especially segregation when it comes to the world of education. So he was a well-established journalist prior to the 1619 project. And so in 2019, that marked the 400th anniversary that the first slaves of African descent came to Jamestown, Virginia, right, which is the first American colony. And so what she did is really brought together and weaved together a series of essays. She wrote one of the essays, a myriad of other people wrote essays that had to do with slavery. Part of the controversy is her statement around essentially how slavery and maintaining slavery was critical to the founding of this nation and critical to the reason as to why the Revolutionary War was fought. And you have some historians who argued against that, and you have some historians who are for that. I think for me, one of the things, and now she also has a book as well by the same name. I think for me, one of the concerning pieces around this being controversial is it speaks to America really entering a phase of anti-intellectualism. So you don't have to agree with someone, that's fine. You can have a scholarly disagreement, but that's what it should be. It should be a scholarly disagreement. I think what ends up happening is when we're talking about some people claiming to be offended and feeling as though America is under attack, what that also says, though, is it brings into question whether or not people truly see Black Americans as holistically American, right? And I say that because if we're talking about a people who were enslaved for 246 years, and we want to bypass that for the convenience of some others who were not subjected or whose ancestors were not subjected to slavery, then what you're really saying is that the African American experience is not critical and also intertwined into the whole American experience. But there is no America without Black America. There is no America building a massive amount of wealth without enslavement. There is no America building really a cultural empire without the cultural contributions of Black people, right? And so it really is disheartening to see the consistent pushback going beyond the pale of really disagreeing with the scholarly arguments that are being made and really being venomous in their attack. And that is, I think, what is most concerning.
It's a shame. It's a shame. I haven't read the book yet, but from time to time, I read a little bit of snippets of it, and I find it fascinating. I find it really fascinating, and I must say, I will confess that, when I learned American history, there's a lot of things I did not know. Till now, I am learning so much about African American history, and I wonder if I'll ever know everything because so much was hidden from us. So we're taking a short break and we'll be right back.
"15 Untold Black History Inventors" wasn't taught at school. Most people have heard about famous inventions like the light bulb, the cotton gin, and the penicillin. But did you know that many of the products we use every day were created by Black people? Here's a list of 15 of them that, until now, you probably didn't know about. Frederick McKinley Jones. If your refrigerator has any produce from your local grocery store, then you can credit African American inventor Frederick McKinley Jones. Jones took out more than 60 patents throughout his life, including a patent for the roof-mounted cooling system that's used to refrigerate goods on trucks during extended transportation in the mid-1930s. He received a patent for his invention in 1940, and co-founded the U.S. Thermo Control Company, later known as Thermo King. The company was critical during World War II, helping to preserve blood, food, and supplies during the war. Dr. Shirley Jackson. Dr. Shirley Jackson is an American physicist who received her PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1973. She was the first African American woman to earn a doctorate in nuclear physics at MIT. In addition to her lengthy list of academic achievements, she also has an impressive number of inventions under her belt. Her experiments with theoretical physics paved the way for numerous developments in the telecommunication space, including the touch-tone telephone, the portable fax, caller ID, call waiting, and the fiber optic cable. Today, Dr. Shirley Jackson is the 18th president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. Lewis Latimer. Inventor and engineer Lewis Latimer was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts, on September 4, 1848. He collaborated with science greats Hiram Maxim and Thomas Edison. One of Latimer's greatest inventions was the carbon filament, a vital component of the light bulb. His inventions didn't stop there. Working with Alexander Graham Bell, Latimer helped draft the patent for Bell's design of the telephone. This genius also designed an improved railroad car bathroom in an early air conditioning unit. So the next time you're escaping a hot day inside your cool house, don't forget to thank Lewis Latimer. Marie Van Britten Brown. Did you know that the first home security system was invented by a Black nurse? Meet Marie Van Britten Brown. Although she was a full-time nurse, she recognized the security threats to her home and devised a system that would alert her of strangers at her door and contact relevant authorities as quickly as possible. Her original invention consisted of peepholes, a camera, monitors, and a two-way microphone. The finishing touch was an alarm button that, when pressed, would immediately contact the police. Her patent laid the groundwork for the modern closed-circuit television system that is widely used for surveillance, home security systems, push-button alarm triggers, crime prevention, and traffic monitoring. Otis Boykin. Otis Boykin's most notable contribution to science was likely the circuit improvements he made to pacemakers after losing his mother to heart failure, a contribution that has saved countless lives since. But this single improvement was among a long list of achievements. Boykin had 26 patents in his name and is famed for the development of IBM computers, burglar-proof cash register, chemical air filters, and an electronic resistor used in controlled missiles and other devices. Lonnie G. Johnson. Did you ever enjoy water gun fights as a kid? Well, meet Lonnie Johnson, the man that gave us the most famous water gun, the Super Soaker. Lonnie wasn't a toy maker. He was actually an aerospace engineer for NASA with a resume boasting a stint with the U.S. Air Force, work on the Galileo Jupiter probe and Mars Observer project, and more than 40 patents. Yes, he is also working on the Johnson Thermoelectric Energy Converter, JTEC, which converts heat directly into electricity, but it's the squirt gun he created that has given us all the most joy. Charles Drew. Every 2 seconds someone in the U.S. needs blood. Thanks to Charles Drew, that blood is available. Drew was a physician, surgeon, and medical researcher who worked with a team at Red Cross on groundbreaking discoveries around blood transfusions. In World War II, he played a major role in developing the first large-scale blood banks and blood plasma programs. He also invented the, and get ready because this name is pretty charming, bloodmobiles. These are the refrigerated trucks that, to this day, safely transport stored blood to the location where it is needed most. Drew was one of the most prominent doctors working in his field, and one of the only African Americans, during a time when blood donation was still separated along lines of race. Drew eventually resigned from his position with the American Red Cross over their insistence on adhering to this policy. It was 1950 before the Red Cross finally recognized all blood as being equal. Marion R. Croak. In 2013, Marion Croak was inducted into Women in Technology International's Hall of Fame, a move that recognizes her remarkable achievements in tech. Croak holds over 135 patents, primarily in voice-over Internet Protocol, VoIP, some in other areas. She has another 100 patents currently under review. Today, Marion is an SVP at AT&T, serves as a mentor for women in AT&T Labs, and sits on the board for the Holocaust, Genocide and Human Rights Education Center. Lisa Jalobter. If you ever enjoyed an animated GIF on the web, like this one amazing clip of a kitten being scared by an iguana, then you have Lisa Jalobter to thank. Jalobter was integrally involved with the advent of Shockwave, a technology that formed the beginning of web animation. She also played a major role in the emergence of online video, later serving on the senior management team at Hulu. Previously, Lisa was the interim head of digital for BET Networks and ran technology, product and business operations. Today, you can catch Lisa at the White House, in the United States Digital Service. She is currently serving as the Chief Digital Service Officer with the U.S. Department of Education. Philip Emeagwali. Due to cost, Philip Emeagwali was forced to drop out of school at age 14. But this didn't stop him from becoming one of the greatest computer pioneers of our time. In fact, he's often called the Bill Gates of Africa. As an adult, Emeagwali began studying nature, specifically bees. The construction of the honeycomb inspired him to rethink computer processing. In 1989, he put this idea to work, using 65,000 processes to invent the world's first supercomputer, able to perform 3.1 billion calculations per second. Jesse Ernest Wilkins Jr. Jesse Ernest Wilkins Jr. is one of America's most important contemporary mathematicians. At 13, he became the University of Chicago's youngest student. Wilkins continued his studies there, earning bachelor, master, and eventually earning his doctorate degree in mathematics at the age of 19. He's published papers in mathematics, optics, and nuclear engineering. As a mathematician for the American Optical Company in Buffalo, New York, he perfected lens design for microscopes and ophthalmologic uses. His greatest contribution to scholarship was the development of mathematical models to explain gamma radiation and his work on developing a shielding against gamma radiation. His other claim to fame came from working on the Manhattan Project. At the Manhattan Project, Wilkins worked with future Nobel laureate Eugene Wigner and made significant contributions to nuclear reactor physics, now known as the Wilkins effect and the Wigner-Wilkins spectrum. Elijah McCoy. Often regarded as one of the most famous black inventors ever, McCoy was credited for 50 inventions over the span of his career. In an effort to improve efficiency and eliminate the frequent stopping necessary for lubrication of trains, McCoy devised a method of automating the task. In 1872 he developed a lubricating cup that could automatically drip oil when and where needed, vital in avoiding sticking to the track. The lubricating cup met with enormous success and orders for it came in from railroad companies all over the country. It was so popular that when other inventors attempted to steal his idea and sell their own versions of the device, companies were not fooled. They insisted on the authentic device, calling it the real McCoy. Garrett Morgan. Those who survived either of the world wars thanks to a gas mask have Garrett Morgan to thank. Morgan first created the safety hood to help firefighters navigate smoky buildings, later modifying it to carry its own air supply, making it the world's first effective gas masks. He also had the good sense to add a third position to the traffic signal. Yes, there was a time when traffic signals just said indicated, stop, or go, an addition that further reduced automobile accidents. Mary and Mildred Davidson. Mary and her sister Mildred patented many practical inventions. They didn't have technical education, but they were both exceptional at spotting ways to make people's lives better. Together, they invented the sanitary belt. Later, Mary invented the moisture-resistant pocket for the belt. While disabled from multiple sclerosis, Mary went on to invent the walker and the toilet tissue holder.
We are back with Rudy Jean-Bach, who is our speaker this evening, and we are talking about the whole movement of really, how would I say this, not being able to really teach our children African American history the way they should because of some of the conservatives and their parents who feel that their children or some children may feel uncomfortable hearing about that time. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Rudy, let me ask you a question. When they say we want to offend anyone, what would you, as a historian, what do you think they may feel offended by? Give me an example.
So in 1918, there was a lynching. Specifically in Valdosta, Georgia, is the one that I am referring to. A man by the name of Haynes Turner was lynched. He was wrongfully lynched. He was not guilty of the crime that he was espoused to have committed. So his wife, Mary Turner, decided to go to the police. Understandably so, the love of her life is murdered. And not only is he murdered, but he's wrongfully murdered or wrongfully accused for a crime he did not commit. And as she is communicating with the police, members of Valdosta, Georgia, go into the jail and kidnap, essentially, Mary Turner, and they lynch her as well.
Wow.
But it should be stated that she was hung upside down. She was 8 months pregnant. They cut open her stomach, cut the umbilical cord, killed the baby, shot her over 100 times, and then burned her to death. That is historical truth. So the fear is if a person, in particular, a white student, was exposed to that truth, that they would be offended or made to feel quote unquote white guilt. But my retort to that would be that you can't hide the truth forever. That's number one. Secondly, if the intent is true and the intent is innocent, then you should not shield the truth, but rather share the truth so that these horrible acts cannot be repeated again. So the fear that I have is when you think about history not being true, or it's rather shared in a very authentic way, and you still see disparities, right? So I always like to say, historical occurrences lead to sociological consequences. You don't have historical context, but you see disparity. You see a Black neighborhood is typically more impoverished. You see a Black neighborhood is typically more policed. You see that Black people are typically more incarcerated. You see that there are more clinics than there are hospitals in Black neighborhoods. You see that there are typically more convenience stores and grocery stores in Black neighborhoods. You see that there are typically more check cashing stores than banks in Black neighborhoods. Without historical context, you may think that Black people are naturally inferior. And that's the reason why historical context is important. Black people didn't find themselves naturally in these conditions and in these societies, societal conditions rather. And so it's important to give you the context in order to understand why the disparities exist. And so it's not new because, again, I don't think historical truths are often shared in the classroom. And that's why students go to college. Judicial thoughts, and I'm not just talking about whites, I'm talking, you could be Black and be prejudiced against your own kind, right? Because there's no historical context. I can't tell you the amount of times that Caribbean people, and I am of Caribbean descent, right? But I teach African-American history, but of course, I include Caribbean history, in particular the Haitian Revolution, in my teachings as well. That being said, it's amazing how many times Caribbean folk have come to me and said, you know, prior to me hearing you speak about African-American history, I judged African-Americans. I had all of these assumptions. But then when you broke it down as to why these disparities occur, then it radically changed my outlook, right? And so history and history being shared in truth is critically important to the development of any society, and America is no different.
And you know, I do appreciate what you've said. If we cannot, you know, our kids cannot learn about their history or about anybody's history, there is a sense of being devalued. You know, I don't think people really understand that. It's saying, okay, what you went through was not important. There's no need. It's the past. I hear people say quite often, it is the past. And on the other side of the coin, they're also not talking about the many communities, many African American communities that flourished. You know, you're hearing that in many states, some of the communities were referred to as the Black Wall Street. Can you tell us a little bit about the socioeconomic successes that we've seen, you know, earlier during in the 1900s?
Yeah, so I think even if I could go before even then and then connect it to Black Wall Street, you have a situation where Mansa Musa is a ruler in Mali during the 1300s or so, Common Era. And Mansa Musa, according to some studies, is the wealthiest man to ever live. And this is an African ruler, right? And if you utilize inflation, his net worth is about $400 billion, right? And so wealth isn't new to the Black community. But of course, slavery played a role in impeding the accumulation of wealth. O.W. Gurley and J.B. Stratford end up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And they realized that they lived in a segregated America. They realized that it was important to really work together as a Black community and really think strategically and collectively about building, if you will, a Black economic ecosystem that would be transformative. And so Tulsa, Oklahoma is really one of the places that is known as Black Wall Street. It definitely is the most famous Black Wall Street, right? Durham, North Carolina also had a Black Wall Street, if you will. But what speaks to the wealth that was accumulated and the success is that so many businesses were in Black Wall Street, and the Black dollar matriculated within the community several times over, right? If you compare that now, one study says that 98% of the funds that a Black person has is spent outside of the community, right? Today. Well, if you juxtapose that with what happened in Black Wall Street, where the dollar kept circulating, there was no need essentially for people who lived in Greenwood section of Tulsa, again, which is known as Little Africa, but also Black Wall Street, to leave their community. And then you have, of course, in 1921, the bombing of that community. There was an air raid on that community. You had a gentleman by the name of Dick Rowland. He had stumbled upon a white teenage elevator operator by the name of Sarah Page. She screamed, right? And it's one of those things, if you're Black in 1921 and a young white lady screams, you either run or look guilty regardless, right? And so you can stay if you want to, but then you're going to be arrested, but then you're also eventually going to be, caught. And so he was caught and he was arrested. Mm-hmm. Now, it should be stated that in Black Wall Street in Greenwood and Tulsa, not only did they accumulate wealth, but they also accumulated guns for safety for their own communities. These are not individuals who are incapable of defending their communities. And so they went to the jail where Dick Rowland is. They told the officers, essentially that, hey, we can help you protect him, also help protect our area, because we know that if there is accusations, which there were, of sexual assault, even though sexual assault did not occur, there could be some serious ramifications on our community. Mm-hmm. And so there becomes this back and forth, a gunshot goes off, and that begins a race riot. Now, again, Black members of the community were able to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. It was not until there was an air raid where bombs literally were dropped from the sky that eventually caused thousands to lose their homes and anywhere from hundreds to thousands to be murdered on that particular spot. And it essentially destroyed, Greenwood, right? And so one of the things I think is interesting is I did a presentation one time and I had a slide of Black Wall Street, a photo of it. And someone who didn't know what it was a photo of said, oh, that looks like Las Olas. Like, so for those who are from, Broward County or live in Broward County, that Las Olas is one of the wealthiest, most prestigious areas, if you will, in all of Broward County. And so I think that speaks to really the kind of community that Greenwood was and the unfortunate incidents of it losing itself because of racism is truly, truly disheartening. And unfortunately, it's the kind of history that many don't want to be shared.
Which brings me to just a thought that crossed my mind. Quite often when we think about our history, we see ourselves as slaves, as servants, as farmers. I don't recall ever hearing about Black Wall Street, nor seeing many African American who were, wealthy and, and their descendants still have some of the wealth that they've created. The multi-generational wealth continues, but I don't think we discuss that enough. Because many of our children, particularly before 18 years, they have to understand that it's a choice. You can be successful. Even when things were hard, there were many people who were successful. So this is where I think, as our children are developing their identities, as well as, knowing, okay, this person could be a role model. If they've done it, I can do it now. So I think it's really detrimental to our children. And I really, really hope, their education or our history is not hindered by this movement that I am seeing. So, as a historian, suppose this bill passes, how will that impact the way you teach history?
I don't know, to be honest. Um, I don't know how to teach history watered down. I just don't, right? So could there be ramifications where I'm not allowed to teach history any longer? That's a possibility. Fortunately for me, I don't just teach history exclusively, right? And so it's no longer the majority of my income. So, but even still, I don't know how to teach watered down history. The reason why I got into this is because of the need to share a truthful autopsy of our history, right? There's good and there is not so good. So I will say that will many, including myself, be a bit more strategic? That's possible. But I think, again, it's hard to go against what can be proven. What I'm eager or hopeful about is that there should be litigation against a lot of these pieces of legislation as it relates to them being attack on the First Amendment rights, right? And so I want to hear more from attorneys. I don't want for people to cower and say, well, they're making us no longer teach truth, so therefore we just got to stop teaching truth. I want for litigators to say, we're going to do what we need to do to challenge these laws. Because when you think about various countries, whether you think about Germany as an example, a myriad of other countries that end up being anti-democratic. I'm thinking about Germany during the Nazi era, of course. And then even beyond that, when you go to various countries that are not democratic and you meet people from these countries, what they'll share with you is that there was clearly information that was not taught in their schools, right? Because it is known that in order to cultivate an anti-democratic society, you must not teach things that could lead to democratic ideals. And so we are heading into a space that is very reflective of communist countries, and yet the thought is that this is somehow, some way, because of patriotism and because of a way to maintain democracy. And what's scary is we're becoming the communist nation that we say that we never wanted to be, right? When you're withholding information to that degree. So I don't know. I think it will impact a lot of educators.
Yes.
I think a lot of people, understandably so, are very much tied to their livelihoods and don't want to do anything that disrupts their income. And there have been instances that I've read already that people in places have lost their jobs, right? But what are we going to do as a country? One of the things, though, that has made America what it is that there's been resistance at every turn in American history. And this is no different. There needs to be resistance to these tyrannical laws.
My children went to HBCUs, and it was interesting. When they came back, they said it was the best decision they could have made, simply because there is a sense of pride that they came back with. Obviously, one went to Benedict, the other went to Clark Atlanta University. Until now, I think my daughter says, Mom, it was the best decision. My decision for her was to stay here in Florida. And she ended up there, and I feel good knowing that it was a good decision that she feels she made, because there is that sense of pride. And I can see with this particular movement, there may be an impact on how HBCUs teach as well. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping not.
Yeah, so I'm a product of an HBCU as well. Proud Florida A&M University Rattler. I think that will be difficult because you're right. There's a sense of pride that happens when you go to HBCU, but it doesn't happen, through osmosis. It's really is uh, based upon that you are engaging with Black faculty, majority Black faculty. You are engaging with Black peers who end up to do phenomenal things, right? And you end up learning about your past. That is instrumental, right? In the HBCU experience. And so to water down extensively the teaching of the Black experience would essentially kind of dull the HBCU experience. So I don't know, and I think that there'll be a lot of faculty who are still going to teach truth to power. I don't know how this is going to be legislated. My thing is, if everyone does what we need to do, which is to continue to speak truth, how do you can't take all of us, right?
Right.
And so it becomes, incumbent upon us to say, we refuse to cower and bow down to something that is going to set our country back.
The argument would be, I gather, well, we're not offending anybody because that population,
Some
the
people, though,
demographic would be different.
I think for some people, unfortunately, though, Black people existing is what they find offensive, right? And I think that's not a part of the narrative enough, that some of these pieces of legislation is catering especially to those who see Black people as less than. And that is alarming, to say the least.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've approached the end of our program. Any last word for our viewers on this subject, particularly as we celebrate February, we're celebrating Black History Month?
Sure. I think it's so important that we redefine what racism is. Just because you have a Black friend doesn't mean you're not racist. And racism, I think, in its core is seeing one's race as superior, either consciously or subconsciously. And so if you're saying, well, I'm in support of this bill or I'm in support of this thought process, but I have Black friends and I'm not racist, I would say I dare you to do some really long, hard introspection. One of the ironies I find is there have been many people telling Black people to get over it, right? Stop being so sensitive and, stop worrying about slavery. And yet there's legislation that is literally saying we don't want to be offended. So who really is sensitive, right? Is the question. And so there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. And I want for people to understand that our very democracy is at stake. And that might seem hyperbole, but it is not, right? And so what America are we going to hand to our children and potentially our grandchildren is the question we have to ask ourselves. And if we do nothing, then we will hand them an anti-democratic society.
It will be interesting. Rudy, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I wish you the very best and continued success. I kind of follow some of the things you are doing at the college, and you are doing an amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you. You as well. Appreciate it.
According to a February 2nd, 2022 news article in USA Today, the rhetoric of division and how children should be taught African American history is entirely driven by white parents and supported by Republican lawmakers, promoting and protecting the teaching of African American history is a moral imperative because we must honor our history. And I truly believe that honoring Black history is American history. And we must have the courage to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly as long as it is the truth. So, my dear friends, thank you for spending your Saturday night with us. And until next time, be safe and be well. Good night.